Thank you very much indeed for the very warm welcome here. Thank you to all of you who have stayed till 4 p.m. today. Unfortunately, I have to speak in English, so I will try to do my best to make it as understandable as possible. And I apologize for bringing all of the rain with me yesterday in the plane. It's been terrible. We have this in England all the time. And I thought Portugal would be lovely and sunny, but unfortunately, not this time. So, as the very kind introduction says, I work for CDP. I'm based in London. It used to stand for the Carbon Disclosure Project. And I manage our engagement with all subnational governments from our cities that we work with to our state and regional governments as well. And I'd really like to take about 15 minutes of your time today to give you a 2 to 3 minute overview of CDP, and then more importantly to try and concentrate a little bit on what we're looking to get out of this session, which is a sort of the green economy, green growth within cities. How can we really drive that? Where are there gaps that we can work on from here? So as I just mentioned, these are the 4 bullet points. I'd like to just take 2 minutes to go through those first 2, and then spend most of the time talking about how we promote business opportunities in cities, and also how we can grow investor interest in city projects as well. So CDP is a not-for-profit organisation. We work very closely with Sophia, with BCSD, and we have over 5,000 companies that complete a questionnaire that we send to them every year on how they are managing their exposure to climate change risk and what opportunities they identify from climate change. We also send a similar questionnaire to over 300 cities and over 60 states and regions as well. And these questionnaires are sent, particularly the company questionnaire, it's sent on behalf of over 800 institutional investors. These are big banks, big asset managers, and they want to know how companies that are listed on stock exchanges are managing their exposure to climate change risk. So CDP acts as the middle point between the investors and the companies to provide them with that information on how companies are managing that risk. So the whole point of CDP and the whole reason we exist is because we believe that if you don't measure it, you simply cannot manage it. And we've been running for about 15 years. We're about 150 staff across the world. Our headquarters are in London. And we work across these 5 programs. The main focus of our talk today is the Cities, States and Regions program, but there are 4 other core corporate programs that we work on as well. As I mentioned, those corporate programs where we work with them on climate change risk, we talk to them about the water quality in their companies, we talk to them about the deforestation risk that their companies have. All of that information is asked for on behalf of investors. Those asset managers come to CDP and say, I really want to know how the FTSE 100 are managing their exposure to climate change risk. Can you find that out from us? And we send that questionnaire to get that information. But today we're really talking about the cities, the states and regions. And this is our annual process. You could split our year into 4 quarters. And in the first quarter we send this request for information, this questionnaire. And we ask the cities, we ask the companies, and we ask the states to fill this out. In that second quarter, they take the time to answer that questionnaire. They fill in as much or as little information as they want, and they can give it to us in a private format or in a public format. In the third quarter of every year, so from July through to October, we crunch all of this data, write reports, put it together in our analytics software, provide it to investors, and also provide it back to those companies or those civil servants working in the cities and working in the states that took their time to fill out the questionnaire. So we provide that analysis directly back for them so they can get a little bit of information, and they can use that to influence point 4, which is their policy decisions and policy actions going forward. To give you a sense of scale, those 5,000 companies represent over, so nearly 20% of global GHG emissions. That's about 8 gigatons in emissions. From our city program, there's about 1.5 gigatons reported there, and from the state and regional program, there's about 3.5 gigatons there. There is an area of overlap between the companies in the cities, in the states, but just to give you an idea of scale, that's what sort of information, what sort of scale is being managed through CDP every year. And the companies that report to CDP in 2014 identified $55 million in savings. So those were projects that, savings that came through from mitigation activities in particular, and they said by taking these energy efficient measures, by reducing these emissions in these areas of our business, overall we've saved $53 million. And likewise, to transition to our cities program, we see that those cities that work with us for a number of years are more likely to disclose or to put in their questionnaire more actions in these key areas of information. So we're talking about actions to reduce emissions, we're talking about opportunities from climate change. The climate hazards in the middle is an anomaly. We had an unusually high disclosure rate or answering of the questionnaire in our middle year, which meant that the final year looks a little bit lower. But the trend is that the more years that you answer this questionnaire, the more years you go through this process of answering the questionnaire, using that information to help you make decisions, the more likely you are to be on a sustainable track and the correct track. And this is how our program has grown. The cities program is only going into its 6th year now, and our work with states and regions is about 2 years old. So all those subnational governments, it's really grown this year to, in 2015 we were at over 300 cities, and this year we want to get to over 400 cities reporting every year with that information, and we provide that information to a number of stakeholders so that that data is used as much as possible. And these are our cities in Portugal, so you know it's not just something happening in a country far, far away. These are the 18 cities that talk to us and work with us every year. On the left-hand side, all of those cities with the asterisks are those that this year, right now, have answered our questionnaire and said to CDP, here's our information, it's ready. And those 5 on the right, Braga is there still, so if there's anybody from the city of Braga, I'm happy to help you with that, are still here and are still working on their questionnaire at the moment. But Portugal is a really high area of impact that we have in Europe. And it's an area, as I'll show you in a minute, where we have some great engagement with a number of the cities in Portugal. And these are the benefits. You know, the whole process is free. There's no requirement for you to pay to join as a city. There is that investment of your staff time in completing the questionnaire. But we try to use this infographic to really show you how we're using your information, both by providing it to you for your policy-making decisions, but also informing the international community. You know, these global initiatives, the Compact of Mayors, for instance, an enormous initiative, global in reach, the Compact of States and Regions, enormous initiative as well. The United Nations NASCA portal, the non-state actor for climate action, we provide all of that information there as well to make sure that it's used and is as meaningful as possible. And I've got just 2 very quick quotes here from Cascais and Belo Horizonte. And here, it's just to reiterate that point of the global aspect of why cities engage and why cities see the value, and it's namely that public communication. So cities have only so much time that their media team can work on providing communications about how they're reducing emissions or how they're improving their transportation, and CDP uses its reports and its communications to try and provide that communication at the international level. And another part that we try and see out of work as we're leveraging, which brings me on to the sort of final bit of the presentation, is that here we have a quote from Belo Horizonte that says that those investments in green technologies and those business opportunities in cities are sometimes very difficult to communicate outside of the city itself, and to also provide easy-to-use information on how successful the project has been. And so CDP's questionnaire really tries to capture that information and provide it to fellow cities who might be interested in how you did it in your city, but also to international policymakers, the business community, and the investor community. So, taking about 10 minutes. These last 5 minutes I'd really like to just show you how we're really trying to drive that green growth development in cities. I've only got about 5 slides on it. But cities are really unique. At COP21 in Paris, only 6 months ago, subnational actors got their first major recognition at a COP event ever. There was a huge drive of mayors traveling to Paris to tell global leaders how well they're doing at either in mitigation or in adaptation. And there was a similar drive from the business community, and there was a similar drive from the state and regional governments of the world. Jerry Brown from California headed there, the governor of Quebec headed there, so we had ministers coming from all over the world to really, show global decision makers what they're doing. And CDP's Cities program has really started to drive one particular area of that, which is the identification of mitigation projects in cities that are currently unfunded. So you may have cities around the world that have wonderful projects with huge promise that are not being exposed or not being put in front of the right investment audience. So we've started a program around COP to really show that cities offer these advantages for climate finance, and we did a small white paper that's available on our website that really identified 4 barriers to sort of engagement and to taking these mitigation actions forward. But on my next slide, I'd really just like to take 3 very small examples of the sorts of sums of money that institutional investors are looking to finance over the next 10, 15 years. We've got Goldman Sachs here who have pledged to commit 150 billion by 2020, Citibank and Bank of America as well. All of these investors and banks work with CDP, with our companies now, but we're really trying to drive that investor group towards our cities on this project of making sure that those mitigation actions and those mitigation projects in cities get the funding that they deserve. So the white paper that we wrote took about 6 months. It was a lot of interviews with cities, a lot of interviews with investors on why are these projects being picked up, what are the real barriers between, why are you guys talking to you guys and what can we do to facilitate that? We really found that there's a lack of knowledge and time within city departments to be in a position to correctly report or correctly market the projects that exist. Climate change can sometimes mitigation can sometimes be low on a city's agenda. In cities where you have enormous congestion problems and enormous economic development opportunities, mitigation can slip off the agenda in favour of encouraging that growth. But the two don't have to go in silo. We really encourage them to happen together. It can be difficult in aligning parties' expectations. Private investors are very worried about the risk of an investment in a city. So one of the things we identified through our case study is that you really have to get development banks to come in and provide a little bit of a guarantee for that risk. Or if you don't have development banks, get national banks to come in and provide that safety, take 15%, 10% of the investment away from the private investors and shield them against that risk of the project going down. Then you start to have a meaningful conversation between private investors, this public finance institution, and the city itself. And the final point is a lack of creditworthiness. This can be quite a new area for investors to get involved. And there's sometimes a lack of information available to investors to know whether a city is very serious with this mitigation project or whether they'll come in and after 2 years nothing will have occurred. So what we've identified is that large, mature and measurable projects win. So over the next 2 years, we're trying to make sure that those small projects really get that measurable aspect to them and really start to grow to attract that investor audience. So this really highlights the process. This is my second last slide. We have 314 cities each year telling us, these are my development opportunities in my city, these are my mitigation projects that need financing. On the other side of CDP, to invest and green projects have become increasingly attractive to these investors over time. So by working over the next 2 years, that's the time that we have our grant to cover us doing this work, we're really trying to unite these two groups together so that those projects in cities can be taken forward in a much quicker way than they're being done now. And this is why we're doing it. So we're really trying to create a market for these projects where a lot of the variables, whether you're a city in Portugal or whether you're a city in Brazil, they can be compared equally. So an investor who has very little time can look at our database and say, okay, these are the people that I need to be speaking with, these are the comparable data points that I want to take forward. We're looking to improve the communications between those two, so part of our fundraising efforts are to ensure that we get the right people in the room at the right time. So often you get people meeting at events and they're at the different stages of their projects, and it's not in a useful time frame to be able to coincide. So by having this long-term time frame, we know, okay, after our disclosure period every year, that runs for about 3 months when cities answer the questionnaire, we know that in the following 3 months, we can start to get investors around the table and start looking at that data. And as I mentioned just previously, my final point is that a key way to take this forward is that the private sector, in terms of those institutional investors, they can't do it on their own. They are looking for that guarantee to save a little bit of the risk from these projects. And so that's why banks like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, these huge sums of money that are available to finance these projects and take a little bit of the risk away from investors by putting in 10, 15, 20% of the project's finance. It's absolutely crucial to going forward. So those are who we're looking for to work with going on. And hopefully those 18 cities that took part in CDP this year really start to see and take this opportunity to engage more closely with CDP in the autumn, because we would really like this project to be a huge success. Thank you very much for your time. I'll have to take questions later on in the panel.